Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Jennifer Dye. I'm a librarian at Detroit Public Library. We've had a strong program with the League of Women Voters Detroit for over 2 years now. We've actually closer to 3 years, I think. We present on issues of concern to Michigan voters during about 10 months of the year. You were brought into this program muted. Please put any questions into the chat. Ruth Colwyn will capture these questions and ask them at the end of the presentation. We might be able to allow people to unmute at the end to ask questions directly if time allows. This presentation is being recorded and it will be made available on DPL's and the Detroit League's websites. It takes a couple of weeks to get onto the YouTube channel for DPL. Deborah Bunkley, who is acting president of the League of Women Voters Detroit, will speak briefly about the League and the Detroit group. Deborah?
Hello, my name is Deborah Bunkley, and I'm co-president along with Sarah Warrants as the League of Women Voters. And this is a big program today, so I'm gonna make it short and sweet. Normally there's a long thing, but the League of Detroit is also represented Highland Park and Hamtramck as well. And we are nonpartisan. We don't get behind any candidates or campaign for any candidates or political organization. But we do definitely, education is what we're all about, voter services. And bottom line is voting, democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to participate. So it's very important that you get educated on what's going on politically, locally. We are local, state, and federal. And I'm going to promote this evening Vote 4-on-1 because it will be launching at the end of this week on the 16th. And we do have a election in Hamtramck for city council. So go to Vote 4-on-1, and there's only 2 right now that have responded. So hopefully you'll go on there and look at all the things that we feature on Vote 4-on-1. So remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to participate. And if you want informed information, state, local, and federal, go to Vote 4-on-1. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Welcome.
Leading the presentation and discussion this evening is Ron Zimmerman, Executive Director of the Michigan grassroots organization, Rank My Vote. Ron's career has been spent implementing the large-scale process improvements in industry. Then he served as a volunteer for Voters Not Politicians 2018 independent redistricting in the Lansing region. I ran that sentence together, sorry. And he's now a volunteer lead of another pillar of reform for ranked choice voting. The group is Rank My Vote. Ron?
Okay, great. Jennifer, can you hear me? Everyone can hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. Sorry that my camera is not working. I thought I had it fixed, but apparently it's come back. But trust me, you're not missing a whole lot. So that way you can stay focused on the slides, and we'll try to get through this as quickly as we can. Anyway, thank you so much, Jennifer and the team that asked me to come, or asked one of us to come speak here today. I think it's really a great opportunity in an area that we would like to try to get more awareness in and around the Detroit area. And I'll talk a little about what we're doing this year in Royal Oak as well, which is somewhat close by. I always start all our presentations just setting the groundwork, just so people can understand kind of who we are. You know, we have some things in common with Voters Not Politicians and League of Women Voters, and that we are staunchly nonpartisan. We really just focus in the reform space. We are grassroots, all volunteer. I've been leading this organization for almost 3 years. I've never been paid. None of us on the board or on the leadership team have ever been paid. So we run this as a completely volunteer organization. And as you can see, our mission since day one is to partner with leaders across Michigan to promote, implement, and achieve the benefits of ranked choice voting in Michigan communities, ultimately growing and leading to the use of statewide. I think we've been pretty blessed to have very good, Michigan is blessed in general to have a lot of reform leaders compared to a lot of other states. You know, some of our advisors have been Katie Fahey, who was one of the founders of Voters Not Politicians, Monica Burke from Rank the Vote, Brian Cannon, who was the Katie Fahey of Virginia. Brian Cannon got rid of gerrymandering in Virginia through the legislature, no less. So yeah, we have folks that have you know, been guiding us and giving us input on a periodic basis for a lot of folks on our team that maybe have never done this before, who are new to this, just very, very eager, but not a lot of experience. So we've had great people to rely upon. Some people might know Kevin Deegan-Krause, who is, I think, one of the premier, you know, sort of political poli-sci election professors in the state of Michigan. I know there's many others, but Kevin has been he's actually now the education lead for Voters Not Politicians, and he was the one that has put together the vast majority of content you'll see in this presentation. And I don't give it justice. He is very, very good at giving presentations about ranked choice. So what I'll cover today, and I kind of do this in a certain order. I think I've done it enough times, a couple hundred times, to really focus this presentation on why would we do this? So why ranked choice? I mean, at the end, we'll get a little bit into a few slides showing you graphically how ranked choice works, how a winner is determined. But I really like to get audiences focused on why this reform, right? If you were to Google the American Anti-Corruption Act, there's 7 pillars of reform to improve our democracy, right? Get rid of gerrymandering, get money out of politics, voter access, right? So there's just a number of things. Michigan actually is one of the leading states in addressing a lot of those pillars of reform, but ranked choice is one of those pillars that really helps better connect and ensure that elected officials are much more in tune and takes a lot more incentivized to be a lot more responsive to their voters. And that's what democracy is really all about, is how closely can you align the behaviors of politicians to the voters they're representing. So I'll do some, why are we doing this? I'll do some good news stories, talk really briefly about our strategy, and then do a little bit of 101 primer of how winners are determined. So real quickly, just want to kind of hit on how does our current system fail us, right? So a lot of people don't know that we're not a majority system. Sometimes you talk to 40, almost 50, probably maybe 50% of our citizens across the country, and they'll ask you, are we a majority system? And they think we are, and we're really not. We're just the person that is first past the post, or the person that gets the most votes. That can be 65% of the votes, it can be 18% of the vote, really depending upon the situation, right? So, and what has kind of happened in that first past the post plurality system, which Kevin, if Kevin was giving this, he would tell you as a political science professor, is probably the worst electoral system. It's the simplest, but it's probably the worst and most manipulated system on the planet compared to all other systems used across the globe, the least representative of communities and so on. So one of the things that ranked choice tries to get at is what has evolved in the past, certainly in my lifetime, probably most people on this call's lifetime, where this psychology has sort of been driven into people that people don't vote for a second or third or fourth candidate anymore because they feel like they're wasting their vote, right? So green people probably don't even vote for green candidates anymore because they feel like they're wasting their vote. So they want to vote for one of the top 2, so their vote means more. This is a concept that when I started voting, I didn't even exist. I don't think there was the idea that I could vote for anyone. That's what democracy is all about. You find the person you think is the best leader, best represents you, and you vote. But this psychology has become incredibly prevalent, almost to the point now where we just only have 2 choices. And one of the things I'm working on, actually my son's an analytical major going to grad school. And one of the things he's working on is trying to get me some data to show in Michigan, because I really want to get very accurate data. I know at a high level it's gone down, but I really want to have specific data to show this, that how much in the past 30 years, so many of our elections here in Michigan, where there's, partisan elections, where the choices have gotten down to literally only 2. And during the gerrymandering days, it was really bad. There were some districts that weren't even running Republican or Democrat because it was so gerrymandered, the other party didn't even bother, right? And these are the things that we have to fix to get back to having a good, healthy slate of candidates running and giving people choices. The one thing in this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more, so I won't go into detail here, but from a technical or tactical perspective, the number one thing ranked choice is trying to solve that plurality, the problem plurality creates, is this idea of split voting, right? Or splitting majorities. And I'll talk about this more in some of the later slides, so I won't get into it here. Another thing that plurality incentivizes is polarization, right? So, and we've seen that, right? In spades, the last 40 years, how the more and more polarized we become, and with primaries, even you're getting more and more through the primary process, getting more and more polarized candidates, extreme candidates. And that leads to a lot of voter disenfranchisement. And I'll talk about that in the voter disenfranchisement and how that was addressed in New York City in the examples, the recent examples. And it also incentivizes gridlock. So not only is it just more polarized in terms of the candidates that we get representing us both at the state and federal level, but it incentivizes them to just dig their heels in because it's a winner-take-all system. They can go back and to the election process the next time they're up for re-election, get their 29, 39%, get reelected. They don't have to set the bar very high to get reelected. So it just incentivizes gridlock. And also, one other thing that ranked choice addresses, which I'll talk a little about too, is that plurality also leads to just much more negative based type campaigns versus issue based. And it leads to a weird phenomenon that, again, Kevin can describe better, but I think, the question I always ask everybody, and I'll ask people on this call, whoever's not muted, is if you're candidate A, so you see candidates A, B, and C, if you're candidate A, which other candidate is most dangerous to you winning your campaign? Is the biggest threat to you winning the election? Is B the biggest threat to you winning, or is C the biggest threat to you winning? Everyone's on mute, so Jennifer's muted everybody. She's done a good job as leading. There's just a lot of people that would think, well, the biggest polar opposite is C. So C is the biggest threat or the biggest, but really in plurality voting, B is your biggest threat. When A campaigns, they will campaign more against B than they will against C, because B is more likely to take their voters away from them. So A and B are more incentivized in plurality to fight each other, even though they have the most in common. They're more incentivized in plurality voting to fight each other or to battle against each other or compete against each other than they are against C. And that's also an incentive that ranked choice goes after trying to address, to make a system incentivized to show voters how A and B are similar, not how A and B despise each other, no matter, even though they're probably the most politically common. So I want to talk quickly about the majority problem. This is really the number one thing, and I think I'll give you an example of this. I mean, you can see it right in Detroit that happened in District 13 this last cycle. So we all on this call don't have to look far to get this example, but you would think that if you're in a district or you're in a state or whatever the voting scope is, that if you have 30% of the people that think like people in red, 30% of the people thinking like people in purple, that you would think that the 70% would win elections, right? Doesn't really work that way. And the main reason for that is what happens with split voting, right? So you would think that's the way it works, but really not so fast. Because all it takes is an election where you have a number of candidates running, right? So it's pretty common, right? If this was a city vote, right, or city scope, or a whatever the voting scope is, yeah, if the majority of the population is sort of a little more homogeneous or common, like the 70%, it's probably more likely there'll be more candidates in the race that feel like that 70%, right? The candidates, it just makes sense. You'll have the majority of your candidates are going to be more purple than they are red. But the problem is the more candidates you enter in purple, the more that the purple vote gets split, and you run the risk of, now I just gave, example here where it's, just 3 purple voters, but sometimes you can have 4, 5, 6, right? And so that often leads to candidates that win that really don't represent the majority of how the community feels, whatever that means, right? In that particular city or that particular district. And that's what we're really trying to address, right? Because what do you hear about, you know, the medium purple and the light purple person, right? Over the years, you've heard them be called spoilers, right? Their voters are spoiling the election, or the candidate spoiled the election for purple. But as we saw in a interesting, one of our first presentations we ever gave on ranked choice voting was in Troy. And Kevin asked, who's the spoiler in this situation? And a 10-year-old in the back of the room stands up and says, the system is the spoiler, not the candidate, not the voter. It's the system that spoils seeing a majority percent of the community getting a candidate that represents the majority. And it was sort of, you know, unexpected, but I don't think it's a hard thing to really understand, right? Is that it's not candidates that are causing this problem. It's not the voters causing this problem. It's plurality voting. And we really don't have to look much further than what happened in District 13. I'd love to talk about this also a little bit more in the question section, if anybody has questions about this. I mean, we all hope, right, that Shuri is a great representative for District 13, right? And that he understands his constituents and the makeup of his constituents, and he does a good job. And we all hope that that's true. But this election showed you that fixing gerrymandering, right, and having independent districts isn't the silver bullet, right? It's not the one reform that fixes everything, right? It's just one of the pillars of reform, because this can still happen, right? You can still have, 7 candidates of color splitting a community that's almost 75% of color, I think is the rough number in that ballpark. And the candidate wins. The only candidate in the race that wins is the one with 28% for the Black, even though the vast majority, if not all of the other candidates were Black. You had Cherie winning the election with only 28% of the vote. And that's what ranked choice tries to make sure that addresses. It tries to make sure that Adam and Portia and John were not very similar and just split the voting of very similar candidates, but people just, either preferred one or the other, slight differences. And for the first time in what I'm not sure I know the exact data, but I think I heard 55, 60 years for the first time in the Detroit is not going to be represented by a Black person in Washington, right? So, and what we don't want happening, and the comment I make here at the bottom, is that good candidates should not, feel required to self-select and remove themselves from the process to avoid splitting. If you remember in the presidential primary, it was Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar that took themselves out of the race and told all their voters to vote for somebody else, right? To consolidate the voting so the vote wouldn't get split. We shouldn't need to do that. If voters out there are very connected with Pete or with Amy or whatever, they should be able to say that's who I think and vote for that person, and not feel like they're being a spoiler or they're splitting votes or they're wasting their vote or whatever it might be, right? And that's the secret sauce of ranked choice. Ranked choice, as I'll get into in a second, is really based on ensuring that any winner in a ranked choice election gets 50% of the vote. And that helps make sure that if you have to get a majority of the vote, then that helps ensure that the majority doesn't get split across multiple candidates. So real quickly, before I kind of move on from the benefits thing, I really want you to remember the split voting. That is by far, by requiring 50%, by requiring a majority, that is the sort of secret sauce that drives a number of benefits. So one of them is, like I said, gets rid of split voting, and we'll talk about what happened in New York City. But I want to talk about a couple of other incredible benefits that have come out really pretty quickly, especially in New York City and some other places. One is equitable representation. So one of the things we're seeing in 2 states that use it now, 2 more have approved it. 100 cities have implemented it, and 50 more cities have approved it or are in the process of implementing it. Some of the things that we're seeing that has really been a nice, doesn't take 3 or 4 cycles for this to kick in. We're seeing it kick in right away, which is, we're starting to see more women win. We're starting to see more people of color win, right? We're starting to see communities that have felt disenfranchised, even sometimes in their own communities, even, Hispanic feeling disenfranchised in a Hispanic community. And I'll talk about that with New York City a little bit. But that's a major benefit that we're seeing with ranked choice. And we thought maybe it would be a more minor one potentially, or it would take a decade for that to kick in, but it's really kicked in pretty quickly in the communities that have used it. The second thing is that I think is that it empowers voters. We see with ranked choice voting, more candidates run, more coalitions. Instead of negative campaigning and less candidates running, you're seeing more candidates and more candidates drawing comparisons to each other of how they're similar. So if you like that other candidate, more than me, vote for them first, but vote for me second, because here's the ways in which I'm similar to the candidate, you like the most, right? For instance. So that feeling of voter empowerment, that I'm no longer wasting my vote, right? That now I can vote my conscience and vote for that person that might not be the biggest poll, might not be polling the highest, but certainly represents my beliefs. Now I can vote for them and vote my conscience, and I can vote the Democrat second or the Republican second or whatever other candidate you want to vote for second or third, right? So because now you have more choices. You have a first choice, a second choice, a third choice. We'll talk about also how this changes and really what you're after with the majority requirement is that you're after changing incentives. You want to change the incentives for the system, for the candidate to be running campaigns, and when they win, to be governing with the right incentives, right? So ranked choice rewards politicians who campaign and govern to reach beyond their base and appeal to more, right? Less negative campaigning, more issue-focused campaigns, and more that focus on solutions, right? You want less polarization, less extreme, more compromise, more results. So you're going to just, in general, when you have less polarization, less extreme candidates that are in the process representing all the different districts, right? You're going to end up with more solutions getting achieved, less gridlock, more compromise. And that's what I think we all want, even if sometimes we don't always 100% agree with the end solution that a congressional group comes out with. At least we know they're getting things done, which in the last 2-3 decades, we saw less and less getting done, even if, less and less compromise. Another minor thing, again, not something I have data on that can be measured, but it makes logical sense that when a candidate needs 50% of the vote to win an election, that just helps reduce the impact of the money that comes in from special interests. It doesn't stop it. There's nothing about ranked choice that inherently goes after. That's just a different pillar of reform that we have to, tackle as citizens. But it does, in the meantime, help reduce the impact, right? So even though you might still have a candidate that's more funded, they still have to gain 50% of the vote. They still have to be, a mayor running in a city that has to demonstrate that I'm supporting issues that impact a vast majority of the community or a much broader swath of the community than just the small core base or demographics that bankroll my campaign and keep me winning every year with 29%, right? So that 50% also a little bit dilutes the impact money can have on elections. Michigan, in terms of saving money, Michigan benefits from some and not all of this. We don't do runoffs here in Michigan, but as you guys know what happens in Georgia, Georgia needs to use ranked choice badly because it gets you a 50% outcome from the very beginning. So they don't have to spend tens of millions to bring what, 8 million voters or whatever it is back to the polls for a runoff, which is kind of silly. Ranked choice voting already gets you a 50% winner of the original race. You don't have to do all that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Michigan. Some of the cities that are looking to use it, like Lansing and some other cities, want to do it to help eliminate primaries and the cost of having to run a primary. So if ranked choice does a better job of getting you a 50% winner and not splitting all the votes, then it's okay to have similar candidates that are in the election. You don't have to have a primary to reduce it down to 3 or 4. And then finally, voters like it. Like in the end, yes, it's a little nerve-wracking when you first have to use it and you want to make sure you know how to vote correctly and make sure your vote counts and all that kind of stuff. Make sure you do things right and you represent your vote correctly. But once people do it, they realize it really isn't that hard. It's pretty straightforward. And I'll say, I kind of put some bullet points in there for what the winners like about it. But the other thing about it is, even in Maine and some of the other states, even when you lose, like even in a ranked choice election, I mean, not everybody's going to have their candidate winning, but at least when your candidate doesn't win, the person that did win got a majority. The majority of your fellow citizens voted for that person, right, that did win, versus today where your candidate loses and the winner got 24%, right? That's kind of tough to swallow when the winner gets 24%, only 24% of your fellow citizens voted for them, right? So these are the types of benefits, all to varying degrees. Maybe the more important ones up top, the less important or less impacting as you go down the slide, but those are the various types of things that ranked choice helps address, all driven by requiring a 50% of the community vote to win the election. So let me give you just a really quick, and I think sometimes this example falls a little flat for some audiences, but I think this audience will appreciate the New York City example. New York City implemented, campaigned, sold it, did a whole ballot referendum on using ranked choice voting for the number, and there's a number of reasons they wanted to do that, but the biggest one was disenfranchisement, right? So with split voting, there were just a lot of communities, like we saw with District 13. That's only the first time it happened in Detroit in a long time. It was happening in New York all the time, right? The high watermark for women in the top 51 positions in New York City before ranked choice voting was 35%, right? So that disenfranchises, women demographics, racial demographics. It disenfranchises them over time, where they get frustrated that, 2 out of every 3 elections, they can't even get a Hispanic to win in a Hispanic community, or a Black to win in a Black community, or only 35% of women at the best have ever, represented city council. So I want to talk a little bit about, well, what happened in New York City in 2021. So first of all, and I think this is a really big thing, is that turnout more than doubled. Now, that isn't all from ranked choice voting, because you can see how there's just certain elections that go, certain elections have more turnout, and then maybe the incumbent runs, and it goes down a bit, and then it goes, it always spikes on a certain rhythm. But it was not only did it double from 2017 to 2021, but it was also the second highest turnout in the history of New York City. So it's kind of hard to parse out how much of that was ranked choice versus just being, a cyclical, more more attended or participated election. But this is certainly data that tells you that those folks that feel like ranked choice is confusing, ranked choice, if people won't know how to do it, they're going to have expired ballots, right, or ballots that get kicked out, and they the vote doesn't count, right? We found out all that really wasn't true, and we've seen it in other cities, but it really, I think, shows here in New York City how voters, knowing they were going to be using ranked choice for the first time, that actually brought all Hispanic turnout was almost triple. it was more than double, almost triple than what it was in 2017, just as an example, right? So these disenfranchised communities felt like, wow, now I'm gonna get a majority winner. My vote is gonna stay in the process longer, even if my first choice doesn't get it. My voice will stay in the process longer to determine who the actual 50% winner is. That was empowering, very empowering for voters. And not only did it increase, now this was continued to trend, so it wasn't like it changed a downward trend, but it did continue a trend of voting down ballot. There's nothing about ranked choice, but using ranked choice for the top positions kept people from still voting down ballot, right? So it continued a nice trend that we wanted to see, to make sure people weren't walking in just voting for the city council and walking out, right? New York City wanted to continue to see all their voters trying to fill out as much of the ballot as they could. So that's all good general stuff you like to see about voting, no matter what system you're using, right? You want turnout up, you want complete ballots up. Like those are just all good data, and they're not unique. right? I mean, if you look at the cities that have been doing it a little bit longer, potentially, you'll see that same trend is pretty common. Like, it's rare that it goes down. Like, I think Oakland had a situation where after the first election it went down a bit, but then immediately went back up. And there are a few cities that saw it go down in the first election. And I think ranked choice learned a lot from that in understanding for future ranked choice implementations, why did it go down? And usually it's based on education. You know, how much did the city spend to ensure that their voters understood how ranked choice works, understood how that empowers their vote, understand how their vote and their voice stays in the voting process for the election longer when you rank. And a candidate has to get 50%. And I think once the community understands that and then realizes that, yeah, it's not too hard. It's, you know, we rank things in our life every day, consciously and subconsciously. That's all we do as humans. Oftentimes, it's just ranking things. What do we like something better than something else? I mean, it's not a hard thing to implement. It's just making sure you fill out the bubbles correctly. So like an SAT test or whatever. Now I want to get to the more equitable representation, because this is also incredibly powerful. And I don't have to say anything more than just drawing your attention to that graph. As I said before, in the history of New York City, there's 50 council positions across the 5 boroughs, and there's an overall mayor. That's 51 seats. In the history of New York City, at the high watermark, best ever, women had 35%. That's the most they ever had in the very first ranked choice election. They now have 52%. They now have more than half of the seats. In fact, even on the Democratic side, because there are some women that lost in the general, because there are actually, believe it or not, there are some wards in New York City that sometimes tend to be pretty moderate or elected Republican or whatever. But on the Democratic nomination side, even higher, right? So those numbers are just irrefutable, and I'll talk in a second why that's the case. And more equitable is also talking about, and yeah, I think I have the slide in here. I just want to check. So, you know, they kind of did a debrief, you know, 6 months after the election, kind of talked about the data and so on. And so, you know, I kind of like this slide because it kind of shows, well, what was the New York City City Council makeup racially before ranked choice, and what was it after, right? So clearly that is showing that, you know, the increase for people of color increased quite a bit, right? But what I think is more powerful way of saying it is that if you actually take that part of the incoming, right? So what does the new council now look like, and compare it to what the population is. For the first time in New York City history ever, that city, it's always looked more like the left, right? Always more predominantly white. And for the first time in New York City, now you have a city council that almost mirrors, like, if you didn't label those two charts of the population versus city council racial makeup, I mean, you wouldn't know, you almost couldn't tell which is which if you didn't label them. That's what I think is powerful about what happened, and a good way to really talk about it. And I want to explain really quickly why that's the case, right? So in New York City, if you talk about women, right? So every cycle, and the reason why women now have more than 50% is every cycle in New York City, there would always be 8 or 9 wards of the 50 where 2 strong women are running in that ward. And, you know, not that every woman votes for a woman, I mean, but it is a voting, you know, a voting demographic. There are a lot of women that vote for women, right? It's a voting block, right? If that's the right word to use. And so what would happen is in a lot of those districts where the 2 women were 2 out of 3 best candidates that were even on the ballot, they would split that demographic vote, and then neither of them would win. And I can use the same exact example of why this occurred on the racial side of it, right? Is there would always be Hispanics were getting disenfranchised because in Hispanic wards, they were having a hard time electing a Hispanic because all it took was 2 Hispanics to run. They would split the vote and couldn't even get a Hispanic to get elected in a 65% Hispanic ward. Same in Black communities and Black wards, right? And you saw those numbers now start to increase with ranked choice, because now those weren't split anymore. You had more than one vote You didn't have to just pick one woman or the other. You could say, I like this woman first, and if she gets eliminated in the process of getting to 50%, then my vote will transfer to the second woman. And that same thing happens in Hispanic community. You don't have to pick just one of the two Hispanics. They can pick, one Latino, and the second choice can be the other Latino. And that reduction of that split voting that I've been talking about is how this graphic changed. That's how we went from what we had in split voting to now get representation that's much more equitable. And we passed ranked choice voting in Ann Arbor in 2021, and this was the exact reason Ann Arbor wanted to do it, right? I mean, the more equitable representation was sort of the message, or that the message that resonated most with Ann Arbor folks. Now, that wasn't racially based, but they wanted to make sure that even though they're a very liberal city, they want to make sure that they continue to get liberals, because they're not all homogeneous or progressive. They want to make sure they got more winners in city council that represented what the majority of the feelings of the progressive community were at that point in time. They always, you're always going to get a liberal or progressive in Ann Arbor. They just like New York City, they just want to make sure they're getting the demographics that best represent their community, both whether it's racial, whether it's a gender, whether it's political persuasion or political beliefs. That's what ranked choice goes after. That 50%, make sure that you're going to get a majority based on what's whatever majority is most important to those communities. And I don't just take my word for it.
Ron, I'm not getting sound. I'm not sure if anyone else is.
I'm not either.
Okay. Well, then I'll stop. Yeah, sorry about that. Something's weird with my computer today. I was worried that would happen. Yeah, I think what Tisha talks a little bit about is talks about how she's just happy with how much in the last couple of years women had stepped up in leadership positions in New York City for the last 2-3 years. And one of the credits she gives to at the end is what the impact ranked choice voting has had, not just for, she's a female of color, right? So she sees the impact ranked choice voting has had for people like her, and how that inspires and now enfranchises instead of disenfranchises, it enfranchises women and people of color now to be running more for office and not worried that they split majorities in their communities. Sorry about that. And then one last thing, and I'm going to try to wrap up pretty quick because I know I'm already 30 minutes in and I want to leave some time for questions. One of the things I'll say about New York City is that after the election, 77%, when 50% of the people don't get the winner they want in a lot of the elections, 77% satisfaction is just, for a first time implementation of ranked choice, is credible. I mean, you kind of hope that you get 70. And in the very first ranked choice, satisfaction was 77. So, all the metrics that you're sort of looking for, the reasons why they did it, the problems they were trying to solve, getting more turnout. I mean, everything was up in implementing ranked choice in New York City. So it's sort of a great example. Not to mention that one of the things they were trying to eliminate was runoff. So they saved $10 million in doing a runoff, which they almost always had to do in New York City. They never had someone with 50% on the first for almost any of these seats. They would hardly ever get people with 50% on the first ballot. So they were always bringing all these voters back in 2-3 weeks later to narrow it down to the top 2 vote getters to vote again. And citizens were just also tired of that because they had a huge drop off. They had a huge drop off of people coming back to the polls a second time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip really quickly. I'll get back to this if we have time at the end, to talk about our goals. But I really wanted to walk for those, because I'm guessing that if I ask for people to raise their hand of what they don't understand, one of them, I think the number one thing people want to know is just how does it work? So I'm going to just quickly run you through this exercise to show you like the very first election in ranked choice in Maine, how it worked. And this again was for US Congress District 2. And ballot's pretty straightforward. It's not a complex ranked choice ballot. Instead of just one column to pick the one choice you want in that election, you just have multiple columns and you fill in your first, second, third choice. So how ranked choice worked in that election? In the first round, Polkwin, who happened to be the Republican, had the most votes, but as you see on the far side, did not have 50%, right? So he had the most votes, but didn't have 50%. And in that case, what you do in ranked choice voting, Will got the least number of votes. Will is statistically just eliminated and taken out of contention. And what you do is you look on the people that voted for Will first, right? You look at all of their ballots and you see who did they vote for second, and you redistribute those votes. So because Will and Tiffany are both independents, the vast majority of Will's voters' second choices went to Tiffany. It kind of makes sense that a lot of Maine voters are independent or just don't trust the parties. They, think the politics are too polarizing and too tribal and so on and so forth, right? So it's almost as if what you're saying in ranked choice voting is if Will had not been in the election, right? So if you eliminate him, who would those voters have voted for if Will, wasn't in? And then you redistribute. And now you ask yourself, right, after you redistribute those votes, you count and say, does someone have 50%? If they don't, which you see the bar on the right-hand side is no one has 50%, then you eliminate Tiffany, right? So in this case, this would be the last one to be eliminated. So Tiffany gets eliminated. You look at all of her ballots and you look to see who did Tiffany voters vote for second. You redistribute the votes, and then you have a winner. Right, so I wanted to it's a very simple example, but I just kind of wanted to walk you through how that works. And a couple of things I want to point out. One is, notice the gray votes. Those are called exhausted ballots, right? So those go down into the none category. That means that there are a certain percentage of voters that maybe only voted for Will or only voted for Tiffany that didn't rank. And so once the ballot is exhausted, once there's no more ranks on that ballot, the ballot is just put into the exhausted column. And what happens is, and as you'll see, and this is statistically how you get a 50% winner. I'll walk through it again. Watch the bar on the right-hand side that represents the amount to get 50%. As each candidate is eliminated and there is a certain number of exhausted ballots, the total needed to win on the right-hand side just comes in a tiny bit, and it comes in the amount of the exhausted ballots. So the number to get to 50% comes in a little bit based on the exhausted ballots. You'll see as I go through this, right, that the black on the right-hand side comes in, and that's how statistically it ensures that in an election, someone will get 50%. So statistically, mathematically required, will happen. And that's why, because as voters' ballots get exhausted, then the total number needed to get 50% is reduced. And that gets you your winner. The second thing I want to say about this is, and you have to know more about this election to why this happened, because ranked choice kind of worked exactly the way it was supposed to. And this election was the forerunner to getting rid of negative campaigning in Maine. You rarely see negative campaigning in Maine anymore. And this election was the perfect example. Bruce was told many, many times, you can't run negative campaign. Like, this is ranked choice voting. You can't disenfranchise voters. You can't piss off Tiffany's voters or Will's voters, because you will likely need those voters to win your election. But he didn't listen. He ran your traditional negative campaign. And Jared spent a lot of his time not only reinforcing to his base what he was running for and what he stood for was important to him, but he also spent a lot of his time not negative campaigning about Tiffany or Will, but reaching out to their voters and saying, here is, okay, I know, you're not going to vote for me first, you're an independent, but if you have to have a second choice, here is how I am similar to you. Here are the issues that are important to me that are also important to you. So if you're still going to vote for Tiffany or Will, vote for me second. And that played out in the very first election. And Republicans up there, I think, learned their lesson about not negative campaigning and feeling how can they expand their platforms to ensure that they appeal to the most amount of voters. So if you want to, could you, Jennifer, could you open it up? And I think Ruth was the one, I believe, sorry.
Yes, Ruth is
Yes.
going to read some of the questions that came in the chat.
Yeah. We have a couple about third party voting in ranked choice voting. So the first question is if ranked choice voting were implemented in Michigan, and if at the same time there was a rise of a viable third party, that could really empower Michigan voters in terms of choices available to them. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh,
Those
well,
ifs.
I mean, I'm going to say this, but I wish I had someone on the call who was a Green Party member, a Green Party leader, or a Libertarian Party leader, or right. I mean, they get this. Like, you don't have to get more than 5 minutes into describing ranked choice voting, and every Green Party or Libertarian gets it, right? Because they now know, because they've had an issue. They're not even seeing Libertarians run for office anymore, and if they do, they're not even seeing Libertarians vote for Libertarians or Green people voting for Green people. They will tell you that they see how this will empower third parties to likely have more of a chance of having one of their candidates in the process. Does it necessarily significantly improve the chance of a Libertarian or Green Party winning? Maybe significant is a strong word, but what I always tell them is that what it does do, even if your Libertarian can't win yet, what it does do is it shows voters, it shows the big parties how many people truly are voting or thinking about the Libertarian candidate. And the voters for Libertarians are now more empowered, where 5–10% of them don't even show up anymore to vote because they're so disenfranchised, that now they will show up and say, okay, I can vote for Libertarian, but I know that I can keep my voice and not waste my vote and keep my voice in the process longer. So yeah, third parties, they get it right away.
And then from examples in Maine, New York City, and Alaska and other places, what can we learn about what ranked choice voting does to overcome the opposition of two entrenched political parties? Is there maybe you said maybe they don't win, but how do they affect maybe the elections or the votes?
Boy, that's a really good question. I'm not sure and I wish I had a more national person to answer this question. My feeling from being on national calls is that I think the parties are still, the parties will always be hesitant of this, I think, because they don't know what it's going to mean to how it changes their power. So it's almost like gerrymandering, right? Like I had Katie Fahey tell me one time, in the very first time I ever met with her and was giving advice, she said to me, Ron, if the state of Michigan, we had the Democrats very supportive of getting rid of gerrymandering, but that's because of where they were on the gerrymandering, side of they were the bug, not the windshield at the time. And if the Democrats had the state completely gerrymandered, would Democrats have really got behind getting rid of gerrymandering, right? So by nature, ranked choice slightly reduces the power of the parties. And it's a power parties have gained over the last couple of decades. And I think that fear of parties losing a little bit of control and power will make them always hesitate, especially if they're currently in power. I guess that's the best way I can kind of summarize that.
Sure. Thank you for that. There's another question about past elections. In your opinion, would RCV have resulted in a Hillary Clinton win in 2016? And I'm using RCV as ranked choice voting, as many folks are writing that for everyone listening.
Ooh, yeah, I don't think I could ever know that for sure. Anyone could know that for sure. I could probably certainly say that Bush would not have beat Gore in Florida by 500 votes when Nader had almost 100,000. But the opposite is true too. I mean, it's probably very possible that in the Ross Perot election, right? It's probably very possible Clinton wouldn't have won because it's probably likely that Perot took more conservative votes in that election, right? So it can work both ways, right? The key is you just want to make sure that you get the winner that has the, you know, the support from the majority of the voters. Well, I just can't answer that question, and part of it is because, you know, it's not a national election, it's not a national vote, it's by states. You'd have to go look at every single state that was within a couple percentage points either way, either for her or against her, right? And see how would potentially a ranked choice have changed things. And you would need someone who really knows that state intimately to have a good idea of how many voters would have put third-party candidates first and voted, you know, or would have showed up who didn't show up. There's so many factors with ranked choice when it gets implemented. Like you think about, well, how would the voters have voted differently? But part of it is that you might have had a 3, 4, 5% more turnout with ranked choice because disenfranchised voters are coming back, and you just don't know how voters that didn't vote would have voted, right? So it's hard to say.
Yeah, thank you. Can you spend some time explaining how ranked choice voting works for elections that are for more than one office, for instance, college boards or judges?
Right. So I guess what you're requesting is when you're voting for more than one, and you're going to have more than one winner.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and I can send a video, by the way, of this, of how both a single winner and a multi-winner works, which I think it would probably visually describe it better than I can give you the answer here. But in very small summary, when you have one winner, then the threshold is 50%. If you're voting for multiple candidates and there's 2 winners coming out of that, then the threshold drops to 33%. So as soon as a candidate crosses the 33% threshold, they're in. And if there's 3 winners, then it drops to 25%. And it would keep going after that, but generally speaking, ranked choice recommends that you don't use ranked choice if there's more than 3 winners, because you want to ensure statistically that you get everybody over the threshold. And once it's more than a 3 winner, they recommend not using ranked choice.
Yeah, thank you. Is ranked choice voting a good system when most voters are either indifferent or uneducated on who candidates or incumbents are?
Ooh, you bring this. Okay, so gold star to whoever asked this question. Not that the other questions weren't good, but this is a gold star one because I think it's important to recognize strengths and weaknesses, right? Every system has its strengths and weaknesses. While some of the concerns of ranked choice, I think, have been addressed, like confusion or lack of turnout or, you know, waste, what do you call it when the ballot, you know, they don't fill their ballot out correctly and the whole thing gets, I can't think of the word now. But anyway, some of those things we now have data that showed not to be true, right? So now that it's in practice. But the question you're asking is a really good one. I mean, the #1 challenge with ranked choice voting is that it does require even the average voter to be a little bit more informed, or maybe a lot more than a little bit more informed. So if you're going to go pick just one, that maybe one might be obvious to a lot of, 40% of the voters, that one is pretty obvious. But for when you have to rank, now you have to kind of spend a little bit more time. So that ability for communities not only to for the very first ranked choice election to make sure that, or the first two probably, to make sure their voters are very, very educated on how ranked choice works, so they fill it out properly and they come to the polls. The other thing is communities have realized that, hey, we got to do a little bit better on how we get information out to our community about who the actual candidates are. Because if you have to rank now, or being expected, you don't have to rank, but if you're expected to rank and you want to keep your voice in the process longer, then you have to spend that extra time to know who those are, so you know who to vote for second, third, fourth. So that is one, and I, on one side I want to say it's a downside, but on the other hand, I mean, isn't that what we want? I mean, shame on these shame on communities for not spending more money to educate voters on who all the candidates are. Like, in the end, I'm hoping what this system does when it gets implemented is incentivize those communities to spend a little more money or find better ways, more cost effectively, whatever it is, to make sure their voters know who all the candidates are. that's a good thing. We should always be wanting a higher percentage of our voters to know who a higher percentage of the candidates are.
Yeah, I agree. I hear that ranked choice voting, the winner is no one's first in. Sorry, I didn't read that clearly. I hear that in ranked choice voting, the winner is no one's first choice. Is that true?
Oh, no. That can happen with other types of voting. The only thing that can happen, and you saw that in the main example, is that not necessarily the person that gets the first place votes can win. But it's almost impossible for the candidate to get, the bottom couple candidates to win without a lot of first place votes, right? I mean, the first place candidates will be at the top. They will not be eliminated. Their voters will not get to their second place choices. It's all the candidates about. Think about it. Again, what we're trying to do is automate a runoff, right? Because that's what ranked race used to be called, instant runoff. So what you're trying to say is you want to keep the top candidates in, and all you're trying to figure out is who would the voters of the lesser candidates voted for if their candidate wasn't in the election. And that's what ranked choice, achieved.
So you mentioned at one point that there's a lesson in how education and the implementation of ranked choice voting depends on the investment of the city or state in educating its voters. How much is an investment how much of an investment would it be for, say, the state of Michigan to implement ranked choice voting?
Ooh, that's a good question. Obviously, for what's holding up the implementation in Michigan right now is getting the Bureau of Elections to certify a ranked choice process, right? And we wouldn't even want to, as ranked choice, a ranked choice organization, implement it without a certified process. You want to make sure the process is going to work. It's been tested. Anything that can go wrong, there's documented process for how you take care of everything. How do you double check and recount and all those kinds of things. You want to make sure that certified process is rock solid. So that's the only thing holding back, sort of implementation now. Sorry, repeat that question again, the end of the question.
Just how much of an investment would it take to implement, say, in the state of Michigan?
I haven't researched it as much. I know that, every year it goes down, right? Because there's just more and more best practices for anything related to ranked choice, whether it's about educating voters, whether it's about, anything about it, right? Just how to educate your community on the we were just talking about. I can't say I know an exact number. I don't know if there is a sort of consistency, a way of saying it, because there are some states that just, whether they needed to or not, spent more than other states, right? I mean, Minnesota has probably spent more so far than California, and it's like whatever, a tenth the size. I don't know, maybe less than that, right? So it really depends on the demographics of probably the state, the demographics of how much the state has been exposed to it so far. Like Alaska had not really implemented anything locally or had passed anything locally with ranked choice before they went statewide. So they had a different approach than Minnesota, who spent a lot of money getting like 5 or 6 cities passed now. So when they go statewide, they won't have to spend as much because they've already, by the time they go statewide, they'll probably have half the state that has already used ranked choice, right? So they don't have to spend quite as much money. So it's hard to say. I wish I could give you a better number. That's not something I probably have researched very well.
That's okay, thank you. So in regards to the New York City Council and the amount of women that were able to get on that, we have a question about, this in the general atmosphere of voting now, there's more women also running for the election. So is it really true that more women were elected to the council because of ranked choice voting, or is it more that more women just ran as a result of the 2016 election?
It's both. I mean, I think both factors play into that. I mean, Letitia James in the video that I couldn't get to play, you couldn't hear the sound. I mean, she mentions at the end of it, like, 4 factors that really played a big role, right? And she even says, one of those factors was the increased number of good women candidates that ran, and the implementation of ranked choice voting to ensure that, the voices of women voters weren't split, right? It kind of goes together. I mean, the one thing I will say is the last election was 2017, and that was the beginning of the Me Too. There was sort of a spike in the 2017 election. And that didn't have a lot of impact on the results in terms of the percentage of women that won. But I think, I think you have to be pretty, I mean, being objective, you have to, assume that without having the data in front of me, that just, more women are running. And the important part of it isn't just the number, it's just quality, right? Just not just having more numbers, but just, more quality women that are pissed off and sorry for my language, right? They're frustrated, they're disenfranchised, and they're pissed. And that brings, not only more numbers, but more quality.
Yeah, thank you. Another question here, sort of about the mechanics. What does it take to get on the ballot for a ranked choice voting ballot for nonpartisan folks, for party folks, and then using primary versus in the general election? Like, how does getting on the ballot look in this system?
I don't think there's a big correlation to needing to overly assess your current rules for how to get on. I mean, people will make the case that you can have more candidates run now in a ranked choice election, so let's make it easier to get on. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think my personal opinion is that it's fairly easy in Michigan to get on the ballot. In general, it's not overly cumbersome. I don't know it well enough. I'm sure it's not perfect, but at least in the cities we're looking at, that's not something that we change. So when we write a ballot charter for Ann Arbor or Kalamazoo or whatever, we typically don't look at making a suggested change to the qualification process. We just let them continue to use whatever they used in the past.
Yeah. And then there's been a move to nationalization of issues so that candidates don't often focus on local and state issues. Would ranked choice voting help increase the focus on local and state issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you need 50, you're the mayor and you're now in a ranked choice election where you can't run against the 6 same candidates and get 33% of your base, which is more or less your base to win each election. When you need 50%, that's raising the bar. Because remember, it's not just 50. Think about this. It's not just 50% to get elected. It's also 50% to get reelected. So you darn well better be more focused on addressing issues of a more diverse part of your city, right? Because that's a high bar. So it's easier to get you out of office now if you're not doing what you said you would. And you better be doing things that are not just heavily focused on the business community or heavily focused on a certain demographic. You better be running on a platform and doing and governing while you're in office towards a much more broader swath of the community in order to get that 50% and get reelected. That 50% is the key to the incentive change. And that's one of those incentive changes. We want candidates to be more focused on not the narrative of, the narratives that are pushed nationally. We want focused on what are the issues of the people in that particular community, whether it's a district or a city or whatever the scope of the election is.
Thank you. So far, that's the questions that I've seen in the chat. I hope I haven't missed any ones. There were quite a few. I wonder, Jennifer, if we want to open it up for more.
Yes, we certainly can. If anyone would like to open up your mic and or your camera, you can raise your hand. Go down to reactions at the bottom of the screen and you can raise your hand and we can let you on. Cheryl, go ahead. Cheryl, I think you are muted.
You need to unmute, Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, I just wonder, how would ranked choice voting affect the election denying that's been going on, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, a lot of things are about timing. Certainly from that dimension, it's not great timing, right? Because I think there is, for a certain demographic of voters, politically, whatever, they feel that there's already some manipulation going on, in my opinion, completely unfounded, but they have that feeling already. So this, when they get introduced to ranked choice, this can feel like, oh, they're trying to, they're trying to manipulate again. But what I will say, the two states that have the most cities passed for ranked choice voting are California and Utah. Utah is not some bastion of liberalism, right? You just have two states that are doing it for similar reasons. They're trying to get rid of extremism, right, in their state that they are not enjoying, or they think is not getting the best out of their leaders. And yeah, they just want to make sure that in whatever community it's implemented in, that they're getting a majority winner. They just want to make sure that elected officials are just better representing the majority and not just, special interests or small demographics or base demographics, right? They want 50% winners. They want majority. And so they both have this very common reason for why they're doing it. But yeah, to your point, there's no doubt that as we pass more cities and we start to become, and this is too strong a word, but as ranked choice becomes more of a reality, more of a threat, there's no doubt that the opposition will certainly play on that point when they start to message against it, for sure.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question?
I'll come back on real quick here. I wonder if there's a place that folks could go to look up more data or more numbers, or just do some of their own research.
Yeah, sure. What I'll do is I have a sort of standard follow-up that I do that I'll send to Jennifer or the team and just let you know where some good links are. Fair Vote is the organization that kind of started ranked choice voting, the first sort of organizing around it, 25 years ago. They're the best place for just the people that want to get into data, right? And like really get into, show me more facts that support some of the, the stuff presented on these slides, for instance, right? Fair Vote's your best place to go. There's lots of videos to go for I think pretty reasonable, respected organizations that support it, from women's organizations to Partners in Democracy is a organization that's trying to improve. They're targeting 7 states, trying to improve getting more quality candidates of people of color running for office, right? They're a huge supporter of ranked choice voting. In fact, Michigan is one of their 7 focus states. She couldn't join tonight. I always like to try to have her join when she can. She's I love the research she's doing to try to improve that here in Michigan. But yeah, that's my.
Yeah. And then another question came in on the chat. Can you speak more to what is going on in Royal Oak?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, you see a slide here where it's passed in 2 cities. Really big win in Ann Arbor. Of the 5 cities we started this year, only Kalamazoo, Royal Oak, and East Lansing will get on the ballot. We just didn't have enough volunteers to get Lansing over the hump, or Grand Rapids. So we're going to have to rehuddle and figure if we, just push them off to 2024 and keep going, or just keep looking for other cities. But yeah, we have Kalamazoo on the ballot, verified by the clerk. We are submitting this week for East Lansing. So good to go there. And we only need, I think, 190 more signatures to be on the ballot in Royal Oak. And that includes a buffer. So if we got 190 signatures, we would be about 300 signatures over our needed amount. So that gives us a good buffer to get on the ballot there. Now, the one thing I'll say about Royal Oak is that Kalamazoo, we have a lot of support and endorsement from leaders of the community, both city council, commission, whatever. Same thing in East Lansing. I think we have both in the city and in the state reps in the area. Royal Oak, we have a little bit of work to do. We don't know their commissioners quite as well. So we still have some work to sort of educate them on, some things that have happened in the past in Royal Oak and how ranked choice will address those. We do have a state rep there who has written, Regina Weiss has actually written ranked choice legislation in a year and a half ago that didn't make it out of committee on the Republicans, but she's a huge supporter. So we do have that there. That's one of the reasons why we picked Royal Oak. But we have a little bit of work to do there. And I think we'll probably spend a little more money to win in, and we'll need to spend more money to win in Royal Oak than some of the others, only because we're playing a little catch up. But I feel very strongly, especially with Regina's support, and if we can get a number of those to endorse it, I think we'll be in great shape. And let me quickly show you an example of what we do. This is an example of the very last mailer. We call it the endorsement mailer. We sent out in Ann Arbor. Part of it was just, it was an off election. So we want to make sure that, people likely to vote an off election, they know where to go, but we had a lot of endorsements in our last mailer. So one of them was, from Chris Taylor, the mayor. We also had Youssef, who also wrote ranked choice election legislation a couple years ago, was one of the first to do it about 5 or 6 years ago. And then we had, every city council person except for one endorse it. So this is just giving an example. Now, what we did was we had a couple other mailers prior to this, which were more educational, more sort of summarizing how ranked choice works and what the benefits are, summarizing what I just presented here. But this is sort of the final one that we did. Sorry, I'm a little proud of it. It was pretty slick. I think our volunteers did a really sweet job, I think, of, really getting the right messages, right? Strengthens our democracy, right? Focused on equitable representation on some of our mailers. So I thought they did a really good job with the mailers. So anyway, sorry, I just had a quick show of that. All right, that's all I had. Is that end of questions?
It looks like it might be the end of the questions. Thank you so much, Ron. This was very informative. I know I would like to learn more about the opportunities for getting involved.
Look, so I'll say one last thing. Everyone is always pulling at everybody to volunteer, right? So I'm not gonna, take a lot of time on that. The one thing I would say, especially if a lot of this audience on this call is gonna be in and around the Detroit area, as we look at cities in 2024 and 2025, we're really looking at communities. Detroit might be a heavy lift, maybe too big for us because we're just too small. But there are, Inkster and Dearborn, Pontiac, Warren. I mean, there are 5 or 6, suburbs, just like Ferndale and Royal Oak, that could really benefit and really have a great business case. Business case, yeah, my old lingo. A really good case for what has happened in the past and how they often get less than 50% winners and maybe are frustrated with not getting the kind of leaders they want in their communities. I think the data shows that some of those communities have great cases to want to get behind ranked choice. So the one ask I would have of folks on this call, that if you live in or know of communities right there in the Detroit area that you think would be really open to wanting to hear about the benefits of this and interested in wanting to implement or consider implementing, those kind of leads is like the number one thing I would ask for on this. Like any leads you could give me on people to talk to because they are in communities that could really benefit for something like this, I would really benefit a lot from that. So that's all.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Certainly, I'll say again that anyone can get in touch with me, and I can connect you with Ron or, well, with the League of Women Voters, but you've already been given the information about the website and getting involved locally. We will be taking the next month off, but our next program will be September 12th, and we're finalizing the topic and speaker. Again, if you'd like us to address any topic, this was a great educational topic. But if you'd like us to address any topic, even if you don't know who would speak on it, please let me know. We will try to look into these things. And if you would like to be notified when something is posted on Eventbrite, you can get in touch with me again at the email address. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Ron. Really appreciated
Right.
it. Thank you, Cheryl, Deborah, George, and Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your summer.
Yes.
Thanks, you too.
Thank
Have fun
you.
in Traverse City.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.